Uh,
All right. Good evening, folks, and welcome to History Hour for March 11th. Tonight we're going to be hearing from Jerry Edwards, who is our president. He is going to be presenting on his great-grandfather, Ira Gardner, who was a young man signed up for the Civil War out of Patten, Maine, and had a very fascinating experience, which he later wrote about in a small booklet, which Gary is going to read from and share some of his own experiences on researching and exploring that part of his family history. So, Gary, you can go ahead and share.
Now I've got to bring up what I want to. Ah, good evening, folks, and just a little bit about how I came to be. Wait a minute, I need to do something. Slideshow. There we go. How how we got here tonight with me speaking. Uh, I have an Ira Gardner descendant. He was actually my great grandfather. Uh, of my four lines, the Gardners were the one I had the least amount of contact with growing up, uh, because my grandfather and grandmother divorced very early in their marriage, and uh, I never even met my grandfather till I was probably 7 or 8 years old. But then I did meet him. I even worked for him one summer down at Old Orchard. Uh, Sometime about 1971 or two, my mother happened to run across her copy of Recollections and gave it to me. About the same time, my wife and I, Jeannie, who's behind me, um, were living in Aroostook County, Presque Isle. And when my folks came up to visit, we went down to Patton, and uh, my mother did stay in pretty close contact with her grandparents and visited Patton fairly regularly, I believe, because she also had grandparents in Oakfield. So anyway, after I read Recollections, I had a totally different view of the Civil War, because what Ira has done is he basically wrote about his experiences in a very readable and pretty complete way. And the story really fascinated me. And I've done some genealogy over the years, and as a matter of fact, back in July, I was playing around in Ancestry, and all of a sudden, a link popped up in front of me, and it said the empty sleeve. And when I clicked on it, Ira was staring at me out of the TV. I mean, out of the computer screen. And I said, "That's Ira. What is this?" And I looked at it and discovered it was a blog written by a fellow named uh, Peter. Oh, yeah. Where are you, Peter? Peter Dalton, who was actually a Maine fellow who worked in D.C., and he moved to Winchester after retirement. And he is a member of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefield National Historic District. Matter of fact, he's also a guide. So I eventually reached out to him, and he was really excited to hear from a Gardner descendant. And I was excited to hear what he had to say. After reading the book, there were several things in it. We will touch on them as we move along that really fascinated me, and I had these questions that have kind of gnawed at me for 30 years or more. And this was an opportunity to answer those questions. So it wasn't long making a plan to go down, meet with Peter, and uh, see the places that Ira wrote about and really kind of experience. So what I'm going to start out doing is reading a few pieces from the book. It's kind of like the beginning when he signed up and got in. Couple of good stories and interesting during. I mean, it's a very interesting and very complete explanation of a lot of what went on. But it's just told not from a historian standpoint, but from the guy who lived it standpoint. So I'm going to start off with the first reading. And this is when things were really starting to look like there was going to be a war. It's the first page of his writing. About 1858, we organized at Patton Village an independent rifle company. I was a member of the organization, and in April 1861, had been orderly sergeant for several months. During the summer months, we had weekly drills. In April 1861, the feeling of bitterness between the North and the South was constantly increasing, and we felt that a crisis was approaching. Colonel Charles D. Jameson of the 2nd Regiment of Maine Militia said to me in my father's office about April of 1861 that we should probably be called upon to go to the front very soon. We found in a few days that the president's call for 75,000 troops had been filled before we could reach the rendezvous in Bangor. In July 1861 came another call for troops. At this time, a large part of our militia company went to the front as Company B, 8th Regiment Maine Volunteers. Being an only son, I was not allowed to go with them. After the departure of the Company B from home, as a boy of 18 years of age with a large share of my comrades at the front, my presence at home became to my parents so uncomfortable, but that by the month of December, they consented for me to enlist, and I did so, leaving home December 4th, 1861, with about 40 others from our section. And that's it's a strange world. I was born on just December 4th, 1946. Ira was December, the 14th Maine Infantry was the unit that he was assigned to, and he went in as actually as a sergeant, and the fellow that got supplies for him. And 14th went to Louisiana. They went to Ship Island. All of the units that went to the south ended up going through Ship Island to into New Orleans and around the south. When they first got there, they spent a certain amount of time on the island, and then they were part of the force that was occupying the city of New Orleans. And there was a couple of pretty interesting happenings there in the book. Eventually, The 14th went up the Mississippi River and were in a whole bunch of battles that he enumerates throughout the book. Eventually, they were called to Washington, D.C. in 1864. And when they got to Washington, they ended up in the Shenandoah Valley. Prior to that time, I've got another reading. I went into the fight at Baton Rouge as a first lieutenant in command of my company. When less than 20 years of age, losing more than 1/3 of my company in killed and wounded, I also lost all my money, bedding, and clothing except for a fatigue uniform, which I wore during the fight. I was more than 2,000 miles from home. I was at once detailed as an aide on the staff of Colonel H.E. Payne. I at once reported to Colonel Payne's headquarters in the old National Building and attempted to decline on account of lack of suitable clothing and money to pay my board. Colonel Payne replied, "Lieutenant, your clothing is all right and I have some money." I served on his staff until I was promoted to captain and ordered to my regiment in December of 1862. I wish here to pay tribute to my commander, Colonel Payne of the 4th Wisconsin. During my service with Colonel Payne, I became attached to him as I did to no other officer during my service in the Army. I learned to love and respect him as a scholar and a gentleman, as did everyone who served under him. As the efforts of his men to rescue him at Port Hudson after the assault in which he was seriously wounded testified. Several men were wounded in attempting to get to him. At last, he begged of them to desist as they were endangering their own life. A nobler man, a better and braver soldier never lived than Halbert E. Payne. And that brings me to basically where I came from. Colonel Payne and later General Payne had an immense impact on Ira. He named his first son Ira B. Gardner. Halbert Payne Gardner. And his second son named one of his sons Halbert P. Gardner, who was my great-grandfather. So it was interesting to me when I read the book to discover these things. I'm kind of reading through these fast because I want to get to the part where I get to where I end up in Winchester, or Jeannie and I did. This is a little cute story that I thought, and I know stuff like this happened all the time. One of the recruits who enlisted at New Orleans proved to be a woman and did duty until the close of the war. She was small, slightly built, and for that reason was excused from some heavy fatigue duty. She was very plain looking and had informed me that she had worked as tailoring. She used to do mending for me very nicely. She enlisted in New Orleans with her lover and was with him until discharged from the service. I did not learn of her sex until the close of the war. If I had been anything but a boy, I should probably have seen from her form that she was a female. He has a little bit of a sense of humor, fairly dry, but okay. So now we're going to get into the crux of the story is at the end of the book when he was The 14th went to Winchester and fought in the Third Battle of Winchester, at which time Ira was wounded. The photo on the front slide was nearing the end of his life. This photo was when he was a captain. And I got this from the state archive. We happened to be down there doing some research and got talking to the archivist at that time. And he found out that I had a relative in the Civil War. He said, "Was he an officer?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I probably have a picture of him." And he went on to tell me that the adjutant general at the time during the Civil War had a goal, and I guess he pretty near reached it, to have an official portrait taken of every officer that fought in a Maine unit. And this was Ira's official picture. On the right, I just found this the other day. It's the 14th battle flag. And I just wanted to show those as I read the story of the day Ira got wounded. Which was well, we run into the date eventually. I can get it, and I'm just getting old, not for wimps. I had felt all morning that I should be hit, perhaps killed. I had crossed the field. The rebel line had retreated and gone perhaps 50 feet into the woods when I was hit. I was about 20 feet in advance of the line and expecting some of the men to halt and load their muskets. I turned around and called on them to come on. He was telling them he was expecting them to reload because they'd fired a volley, but they were close enough so they didn't have time to reload, and he was urging them to come on with bayonets because they were that close to the enemy. I was back to the enemy when the bullet struck me. I have no recollection of falling or of any feeling when the bullet struck me, but soon came to myself and found Sergeant Dick Ashton, who he speaks about often in the book, tying a handkerchief around my arm, trying to stop the blood. I started to the rear, supporting my injured arm by the wrist, and had to cross the field over which we had charged, with the bullets and shells flying over me. But being in such agony, I almost wished the scene that some of the shells would make an end of me. About the time I had gotten across the field and was walking along with my head down, supporting my arm as well as I could, I soon found myself within a few feet of Captain Bradbury's 1st Maine Battery, who were firing. Battery would be a artillery unit, who were firing over our heads at the enemy. The assistant surgeon of our regiment about this time met me and, taking me by my left arm, started to assist me to the rear. But after having gone a short distance, the position was so dangerous that he left me and ran. Captain Bradbury came to me as I passed around the battery, gave me a swallow of whiskey, and I went on alone and reached the field hospital, which was quite a fine-looking house near a mill on the bank of Red Bud Creek. Remember that. We're going to need that in a minute. They immediately put me on a table, cut off my coat sleeve, and before I realized it, the doctor had his fingers in my arm, making an examination. I said, "Doctor, give me some chloroform," at which he threw a cloth over my face wet with chloroform. I snatched it off with my left hand and said, "Doctor, don't take that arm off." He said, "I think I shall have to in order to save your life." Laid the cloth over my face again, and I commenced to inhale the chloroform. The last sensation that I realized was that I was dying. The next thing I knew, I said, "Doctor, don't take that arm off." He said, "It's off." I looked and found it gone, and as soon as I prided myself on my penmanship, and as I had prided myself on my penmanship, thinking that I would never write again, I burst into tears. They soon moved me into the hall of the home and laid me on the floor with a comforter under me. I was suffering intensely. Soon I began to be sick to my stomach and commenced to vomit. Was very thirsty, and the good lady of the house gave me water. I vomited all night at short intervals, which caused my arm to bleed badly. The lady of the house came quite often and watched my pulse. In the morning, we were taken to Winchester, and though I had bled so much that the bedding under me and my clothing about my right shoulder were wet with blood, I was able to walk out through the yard, get into the ambulance, and after riding 3 miles into Winchester, walked up 2 flights of stairs to an old warehouse where I was laid down on a straw tick on the floor. He had to be one tough old bird, or a young bird at that time. Uh, on his way out the door, he he had $5 left to his name, a $5 gold piece, which he gave to the woman, Mrs. Woods, who lived at the house. And where am I? Okay. Uh, I'll paraphrase the next part of the story. He eventually ended up in Washington, D.C., and then uh, the next state over, in a hospital. Uh, Eventually, his parents, who had been notified, chased him down and found him, and he recovered and then ended up going home. Uh, he was very active in the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, and I should have put, actually, I should have put it in, but um, there's a picture of the GAR at their post in Patton with all of their members taken, looks to be pretty close to 1900. He was very active in the in the GAR and in another organization of vets. And I know he had wanted to go down. I missed it. He'd always wanted to go back and uh, he had somehow, and when I first read the book, I thought he went back down to get his arm, and I'm thinking, whatever. But I had not, I must not have read the last page completely, because the story was that Mrs. Wood, who knew he was very upset about losing his arm, had her husband go take the arm, and he built a little box for it and buried it in the yard of the house. So when we found out later that when the federal cemetery was developed for all of the soldiers who died in the various battles, that Mr. Wood took it and got it buried in that cemetery. Uh, this is the last reading, and then we're going to eventually get to go to Winchester in 2024. On the 19th day of September 1901, the 37th anniversary of the loss of my arm, I visited the battlefield of Opequon Creek for the first time since 1864. The Third Battle of Winchester is often called the Battle of Opequon Creek. And, sometimes there's little needles that stick you my sister lived in Tennessee for many years, and we made 2 or 3 trips down. And Route 81, the main route north and south, drives right through Winchester. Matter of fact, when we went down in August, the hotel we stayed on was right on Route 81. Anyway, probably 15 years ago, we were driving up, Jeannie and I, and she was driving, and I was kind of sightseeing, and we came to this overpass on the interstate, and it told me we were crossing Opequon Creek. Small world. Anyway, I visited the battlefield of Opequon Creek for the first time since 1864 for the purpose of again seeing the spot and hoping to find something of my arm and to take it with me to my home. I think he was a little addled by then, but maybe not. On reaching Virginia, Winchester, I fortunately found a guide in Captain Saylor who was familiar with the ground, having been a member of the 5th U.S. Cavalry at the time of the battle. Captain Saylor, Mrs. Gardner, and myself took a carriage at the hotel at Winchester, and from my description of the house, where my arm was amputated, he drove us at once to it. The house did not look natural, but after a few moments' conversation with a lady of the house, during which she described some of the changes since the time of the battle, I soon became convinced that I had found the place. Mrs. Gardner was in the carriage, and I called her into the house. When the lady of the house commenced to relate to us circumstances of the Battle of September 19th, 1864, she stated that, quote, that during the war, over 300 wounded soldiers were put into the house, and during their occupancy, everything in the house was used or destroyed, and that the only soldier who ever gave her anything was Captain Gardner. She had not at that time recognized me. I replied, I am that Captain Gardner. She was very much overcome, and as soon as she could speak, she asked us into the front hall, where I lay during the night after the amputation, saying she had something to show us. I had remembered that during the night my arm had bled very much, and in the morning as I rose to take an ambulance to Winchester, I found the comforter, which I lay on the floor saturated with blood. There upon the floor, 37 years afterwards, the blood stain still flowed. There upon the floor, wait a minute. Having changed the color of the wood so much that the lady said, although she had made many attempts to do so, she had been unable to erase them. During the night after the amputation of my arm, this good lady, Mrs. Charles Wood, gave me all the care I had, and I recall that she came to me as often as once an hour, giving me water and feeling my pulse to see what my condition was. When I left the house in the morning, I gave her the last $5 bill I had. Oh, it was a bill, not a coin, with a request for a pillow to put under my shoulder during my ride into Winchester. And this is where he tells us that my arm was taken off in the yard near the front door, and the good lady says she saw the operation from the window. After the amputation, she took the arm, wrapped it in cloth, and her husband made a box for it and buried it in the yard. After the war, the government had prepared the National Cemetery at Winchester. Mr. Wood took up the arm and properly buried it in the cemetery. I spent some time in trying to locate the spot where I was hit, but was unable to do so on account of the changes in the condition 37 years, and only remember that it was about halfway between Red Buck Creek and the mill in the city of Winchester. Since the war, Mrs. Wood has lost her property and is now apparently a poor woman. And her condition, I have no doubt, illustrates the condition of many of the wealthy families of the South at the time of the war. She is now 67 years old, and I shall try to see that she is made comfortable and to amply reward her for the tender care she gave me. I gave her my present address and sum of money with a request that she inform me if she could ever need any further assistance. Mrs. Gardner and myself were very much affected by the sight of my bloodstains on the floor, as it recalled a night when my life hung in the balance and only a Confederate lady to nurse me and care for me. May God bless the good lady. So I said before that there were some things that intrigued me in the book, and I always kind of wondered uh, what had become. So we're starting to get an idea now. The story of the arm was very interesting, and but I just kind of really wanted to have an opportunity to, and was the house still here? And if it was, what shape was it in? So uh, I, when I'd gotten a hold of Peter, and he invited us down, he met us at the hotel, and we spent the whole day with him. Uh, and this monument is one that was put up by folks from Maine in 2021 to honor the soldiers who fought in the Third Battle of Winchester. It's four-sided. It has a list of all the units that were there from Maine. And so Peter provided us with, we saw a really nice video in their visitor center, which had been closed for the week. And he opened it up so we could see the video. We're I'm going to go through a few slides and then we'll have a time for some discussion. Peter took us around. I'm going to take you basically on the journey we went on, and had lunch with a fellow named Nick Pisano, who at one time was president of the Battlefield Association, is now vice president. Very knowledgeable man. But it really amazed me that these folks in Winchester, I think, basically look at, once they got a hold of Ira's book, which I had intended to hold up for everybody to see, and now I'll do it again. It is really kind of a folk hero down there, or at least in certain circles within the association. So, where am I? This is a wide-angle view of the whole battlefield. When you see where it says Hayes, those were where the 14th Maine was in the upper to the left arrow, and we're heading across that field. This is a smaller version of it, a blow up. And again, it's that upper arrow, and Peter had somehow estimated where Ira was actually wounded. It was just before they went. The fields are still there, and they've kept the woods. They've kept it pretty much the way it was. A lot of the fences were the old style fences. So you can see from that point down to the woodhouse on Redbud Run, which is a creek, Peter invested roughly 2 miles that he walked to get there. So first question was, is the house still there? And it is. What's it tell me to do? Turn the page. And this is the field. If I back up. This is the field looking down across it from a boat. And Peter stopped his car and pointed to right about where my cursor is, and said, "That's where I believe Ira was hit." That was kind of powerful. And here is Pete Dalton. That's me in my glory, and my wife Jean, standing in front of the house. As you can see, it's in pretty rough shape. The Battlefield Association was only recently able to purchase it. And the reason that they were able to do that is it's Redbud Run is a pretty important trout stream, and the Virginia Natural Resources or Fish and Wildlife, whoever bought a bunch of the land there to protect the stream, and this house was on it. And the Battlefield Association has, within the last year or so, been able to buy it and will eventually restore it. And it was pretty interesting to be there. We couldn't go in, but that's okay. So the next slide is the floor of the house with Ira's bloodstains, which totally amazed me. So all of my questions when I read the book pretty much have been answered now. Got one more slide. This was kind of an interesting story. Peter took us down here. He sent me that photo later. I mentioned Nick Paserno. Peter had walked all through this place a couple of times, and he couldn't find any indication. But after we had left to come home, he got talking to Nick, and he said, I thought the arm was there, but I can't find it. Nick said, go back and get into the book that tells you where everything is and look for the unidentified burial sites. And in that ledger, there was a stone in whatever that said arm. That's all it said, arm. And that's the stone. So I can't believe anybody else sent an arm there. So it's really, I figure it's at least 99 to 1% odds that was Ira's arm. So that's my story and our story. As a Gardner descendant and as a historic person, this was quite an opportunity for me to learn more about. Oh, and I forgot, when I first was talking to Peter, I had asked him if he had run across any other Gardner descendants, and he gave me two names, and one was Patricia Gardner, Patty Gardner. Turn your screen on, Patty.
I'm not sure I know how to do that.
Oh, down at the bottom, there's a microphone, and then there's a little, beside the microphone, there's another button.
I just pressed the unmute. I'm on the side with the little pictures on the side here.
Yeah.
So
there you, no,
is that it?
No. But it's right beside the microphone.
I just clicked the microphone and it went off. It's not, when I click mute, the microphone comes.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, it turns out that Patty replied to my email when I sent it out, and she is some kind of cousin. I haven't figured that out yet, but her father, my grandfather is her uncle, was her uncle. Her father, John, was a brother to my grandfather, H.P. Gardner. And then when I sent around this list, he on my screen, two places above Patty is Shirley Pike, and Patty told me that she's another cousin, so someday maybe we'll meet. But on our way to Winchester, we stopped at Patty's house in Massachusetts, and I could still be there. We had a great visit. She had a ton of photographs. I don't have a lot of photographs of my grandfather, and I got some really neat stuff from Patty down there. It was quite fun to visit with her.
Gary, I think Halbert Gardner
Yeah,
was one of the 5 sons of Ray and Georgie Gardner.
correct.
And I come from the Ray Gardner side. So Ray Gardner and Halbert Gardner were brothers.
Well,
And so I
maybe I
think
had that wrong then.
our grandfathers were brothers.
Okay.
Our great grandfathers. So yeah, our great grandfathers were brothers.
Okay.
And
Because I was
thank you
trying.
for. I always wondered who the Halbert Payne, the officer, was, because I had read about him too. When I asked Peter about him, he said he couldn't find information about him. So that was very interesting.
Well, that's on his book. You have a copy of the book, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yes.
See, I was trying to figure out I was trying to figure out how we were, and it wasn't adding up. And now, because I had there's so many John Gardners and Halbert
Yeah.
Gardners, and I had you in the wrong generation. So, because yes, my line is my mother, Patricia Gardner Edwards, and Halbert Payne Gardner, and Raymond Gardner, and then Ira B. Gardner. So,
yes. And those 5 Gardner boys had such tragedy in their lives. It's the oldest of those 5 brothers was Everett,
yeah,
and he was in was it World War II? Gary?
at least 3 of them were in
Oh.
World War II.
Oh, World War One, maybe even.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
Yeah, but when I said back in the 70s, my mother and we went to, and my father and Jeannie went to Patton, and she still had an aunt there that lived about 2 houses down from Raymond's house in a little trailer. She had been married to one of Albert's brothers. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
we're probably, anyway,
You've got 15 minutes.
I've got 15 minutes, so
Questions?
questions, discussion, anybody got any thoughts? It certainly, when I read this book the first time, brought the reality of what it was like to be on a battlefield, the reality of what it was like, because there's a lot of stuff I left out. They never got anywhere really efficiently. They get on these boats and they might go there when they thought they were going to, and they might not. Ira I just got a flash. Ira was a businessman. He
Mm-hmm.
owned stores in Patton. I know one of them was a clothing store. All of the Gardner men were in some sort of business, at least through the first generations.
Mm-hmm.
There is a funny story though. I also have a genealogy that goes back to, I don't know, I haven't looked at it recently, but when computers were first coming in and Ancestry wasn't born yet, I was playing around on my work computer one day, and I went to one of the sites for genealogy, and there were a bunch of folks listed, Gardners. So I sent 2 or 3 emails out and said, does anybody know Ira B. Gardner from Patton, Maine? And the answer, oh, there's Patty. And the answer came back, where the hell's Patton, Maine? And then a little bit later, another email came back and said, wait a minute. And a little while later, another email came with an attachment that was, I think it was Addie, who would be Ira's sister. It was either Ira's sister or Ira's niece, had done a genealogy going back from that period, which was 1900, more or less. So, anything else in chat? But I mean, some of Ira's brothers, and I know there was one bunch of the family that was down around Portland, and they were into, I think, shipping and a bunch of other stuff. But they were businessmen. I know that my grandfather and at least two of his brothers, if not three, served in World War II. What is Ira's book available? I have some copies that I made they're just whatever. What I would suggest is I know the patent library has a copy of it because I found it for them one time. I was in the library, we were visiting, and that particular building was the old church, first church in town, and then it was a library for a long time. And we were visiting, and I went in poking around the library, and I asked the woman at the desk, I said, have you got Ira Gardner's book, Recollection? She said, well, we do, but we can't find it. So I was poking around, and I saw this little blue book in the stacks, and I hauled it out, and it was their copy. So I took it up to the desk. And now the Historical Society, after that, they let the town owned the church, and it kind of got deteriorated. They had to move the library out of it, and they were going to burn it down. And the Historical Society is now taking ownership and are restoring it to use as a museum. So, and they have a very active Facebook page, Patent Historical Society. And I discovered after a while that if you ask permission, they'll let you join their group. They got about 600 people in their group, which I've just done. So I did post this program, and I heard from a couple of them, but I don't know. Is there anybody in the audience tonight that from Patton or from up there? Shoot me a chat. I don't think so. I did hear from one fella, and he said he couldn't be here tonight, but he's a member of the society. Ira's buried in a big cemetery in Patton. His father and mother and the majority of the Gardners of that era are buried in, and actually his father's stone is this great big huge thing because he was a very prominent businessman as well, and farmer. And I think Raymond did some farming when he was younger. But they were a very prominent farmer at the time. But as far as the book available, I would suggest if you want more than I gave you tonight, the blog that Peter did is very good. It shows some of the stuff I showed you tonight, but it has much more of the dialogue in the book than I have. I could send somebody. I did scan the book, and it's scanned so that you can print it out, and it ends up looking like this. It's, you know, a paper copy that's very readable. And if somebody wanted that, I have two emails. They were on the last slide of the presentation, but if you send it just to info@sullivansorrentohistory.org, that comes to my computer. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed me rambling on here. I think it's a pretty cool story, and it really brought to me.
Hi, Gary. My husband has a question.
Sure.
Do you remember Bob?
Sure. Hi, Bob.
Yes.
I just had a little comment that just kind of falls under the category of, odd connections from the past to the present. I spoke to my son the other day, who's a brewer, beer brewer in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he's been always kind of looking around for himself for some farm to start a brewery on. And he stumbled across a 450-acre farm, believe it or not, in Patton. That I think board is it Route 111? Is that
Route 11.
11.
So it's on Route 111.
No, 11. Just 11.
Oh, 11. It's 450 acres. So we'll see. There may be a brewery up there someday.
That's cool.
That's great.
Of course, I'm not sure that he could stand the commute, and his wife is in New York City. I'm not sure that she could stand the cultural lift.
It might be a culture shock, yes.
Yeah.
She's from Brooklyn. I don't think so.
But it's not that far away from other bigger places. We lived in Aroostook County for a long time and enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, you're a good storyteller.
Well, I
enjoyed
try.
it.
Full of hot air.
Very interesting. Did a good job.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
And
Okay, have a good night.
for any other Gardner descendants out there, I love to swap stuff. And
Did you ever
Patty
get a
will-
hold, Gary, did you ever get a hold of Amy Chapman? Her mother was Georgie Gardner, my father's sister.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay,
I
yeah.
don't think she ever replied to my email, but
Yeah, I know she went down to visit the site, but I don't know if she's was too enthusiastic about learning about this. So, but
I
anyways,
think she was the other name I got from Peter, and I emailed her at the same time I emailed you.
oh, okay,
So
yeah.
anyway. Well, I think it's time to call it a night. I appreciate everybody coming and listening to me. I had fun putting it together. I had fun talking about it. It was good to see you all. Patty, we'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
Maybe when I'm coming down to my son's house in New Hampshire. Where did you say Shirley lives?
Where are you now?
Sure.